Hello, everyone. Welcome to this JLPT N5 grammar lesson based on Minna no Nihongo Lesson 1. In this lesson, we are going to study the most fundamental sentence patterns in Japanese. These patterns are used when introducing yourself, identifying people, asking simple questions, and giving basic information politely. Almost every polite sentence at the beginner level is built from these structures, so it is very important to understand them deeply and clearly. Let us begin with the first sentence pattern. The first pattern is
en,
wa,
en, this,
This pattern is used to state information politely. You use it when you want to say who someone is, or what something is. It is commonly used in self-introductions and in basic descriptions. Now, let us understand the structure of this pattern carefully. The first N is the topic of the sentence. After that comes the particle,
wa,
then comes another noun, which gives information about the topic. And finally, the sentence ends with this. The particle, wa, marks the topic of the sentence. It tells the listener what the sentence is about. Even though it is written as ha, when it functions as a particle, it is pronounced wa. This is an important pronunciation rule for beginners. The word
this,
is a polite sentence ending. It makes the sentence formal and respectful. In English, it often corresponds to is or am, depending on the subject. Now, let us look at the standard example from a lesson.
私はマイク・ミラーです。
Let's break this sentence down carefully.
私
means I. It is the most neutral and commonly used way to say I in polite Japanese. Ha is the topic particle, pronounced wa. It tells us that the sentence is about I.
マイク・ミラ
is the name Mike Miller written in katakana, which is used for foreign names.
ーです
is the polite sentence ending. In this sentence, it functions like am. So when we combine everything step by step, the sentence becomes I am Mike Miller. Notice that in Japanese, the verb or sentence ending always comes at the end. The word order is different from English, and this pattern does not change. Now, let us look at another example using the same pattern.
ミラーさんは学生です。ミラーさんは学生です。
Let us briefly break this one down as well.
ミラーさん
means Mr. Miller. The word
さん
is a polite title added to a name. Wa marks the topic.
学生
means student.
です
makes the sentence polite. So the sentence means Mr. Miller is a student. Now I would like you to practice. Here are some sentences using the same pattern. Try to understand their meaning on your own.
サントスさんは先生です。サントスさんは先生です。私はエンジニアです。私はエンジニアです。グプタさんは会社員です。グプタさんは会社員です。
Pause the video if needed and check whether you understand each one. Now, let us move to the negative pattern. The second pattern is
えん、
wa.
えん、じゃありません。
This pattern is used to state negative information politely. You use it when something is not true, or when you want to correct information in a polite way. Structurally, this pattern is almost the same as the previous one. The only difference is the ending. The first noun is the topic. Wa marks the topic. The second noun gives information.
And じゃありません
is the polite negative ending. The expression
じゃありません
is the negative form used in Lesson 1. It corresponds to is not or am not in English. Now, let us look at the standard example.
私は学生じゃありません。 私は学生じゃありません。
Let's break it down carefully.
私
means I. Wa marks the topic.
学生
means student.
じゃありません
means am not in this sentence. When we combine everything, the sentence means I am not a student. Notice that the sentence structure remains the same. Only the ending changes from
です
to.
じゃありません。
Now here are more sentences for practice.
Try to understand them by yourself. ミラーさんは先生じゃありません。ミラーさんは先生じゃありません。サントスさんは学生じゃありません。サントスさんは学生じゃありません。私は会社員じゃありません。私は会社員じゃありません。
Take a moment and think about their meanings. Now, let us move to the question pattern. The third pattern is
N
wa.
N ですか
This pattern is used to ask polite yes or no questions. In Japanese, you do not change the word order to form a question. You simply add
か
at the end of the sentence. The structure is the same as the positive pattern, but we add
か
after.
です
The word
か
is called a question marker. It signals that the sentence is a question. Now, let's look at the standard example.
ミラーさんは学生ですかミラーさんは学生ですか
Let us break it down.
ミラーさん
Is the topic. Wa marks the topic.
学生
Gives information.
です
Makes it polite.
and か
Turns the sentence into a question. So the sentence means, is Mr. Miller a student? Now here are more questions for you to practice.
あなたは学生ですかあなたは学生ですかサントスさんは先生ですかサントスさんは先生ですかグプタさんはエンジニアですかグプタさんはエンジニアですか
Pause the video and try to understand each question. Now let us briefly look at how to answer these questions. If the answer is yes, we say,
はい、そうです。はい、そうです。
if the answer is no, we say,
いいえ、違います。いいえ、違います。
We can also answer by repeating the noun.
はい、学生です。いいえ、学生じゃありません。
Finally, let us learn one more important pattern from Lesson 1. The pattern is
N も N です。
This pattern is used when the information is the same as something previously mentioned. The particle
も
means also or to. Structurally,
も
replaces.
は
You cannot use both together. Now, let us look at the standard example.
ミラーさんは会社員です。グプタさんも会社員です。
In the second sentence,
も
shows that Mr. Gupta is also a company employee. Now, here are some practice sentences using
もサントスさんも学生です。 サントスさんも学生です。私もエンジニアです。私もエンジニアです。ミラーさんも日本人です。ミラーさんも日本人です。
Try to understand each one on your own. Now let us review everything we studied.
N,
wa
N,
です。
is used to state information politely.
N,
Wa
N,
じゃありません。
is used to state negative information politely.
N,
Wa
N,
ですか。
is used to ask polite yes or no questions.
N, も N,
です。
Is used to show that the same information applies to someone else. These patterns form the absolute foundation of JLPT N5 grammar. Make sure you can read them smoothly, understand them clearly, and create your own sentences using these structures. In the next lesson, we will continue building on this foundation and move deeper into beginner Japanese. Thank you for studying with me, and I will see you in the next video.